These shows leave the upper middle class audience. That's network TV. The ritual purgation that allows the audience, myself included, to go on with their lives while the poor and the African American body count continues to improve in real projects. I love The Wire because it disturbs my peace. It puts me on the hook. It makes me think about what the games that I'm playing. It makes me care about the lives that I've forgotten, even in my hometown of Charlotte, North Carolina.
Lived in West Baltimore for 6 years, and watching it become this is really a different kind of thing. The Wire is a truly, truly great show, and has received a Peabody Award despite the fact that it has never received an Emmy, as have both Deadwood and The Sopranos. I want to talk about Deadwood today. I should begin, by the way, with a confession. I have watched multiple episodes of almost every show that we've talked about. I think with Deadwood, most people would not think of it immediately as a topic for the study of religion and the embodiment of religion, largely because of the language of the show. It was an incredibly foul, obscene, profane bit of language. Some people simply couldn't watch it because of that. Second impressions, I think, deal with the language and note the depth and the creative expansion of that language. And I think that Deadwood takes on decided religious undertones in spite of all of these things. And for one thing, the series, more than many others, is formed from a deeply personal engagement and statement about what the show is dealing with. Now, like everybody else, I've been trained to avoid the intentional fallacy. It's not, we don't take for granted what creators say. Certainly, we had a great example of that the other night. People fumbling as producers and writers trying to figure out how to respond to these things. But I think there's something different about David Milch. And you'll note that all of these shows are created by people who have very, very strong personal power in the industry and very strong personal visions. And Milch has written a great deal about Deadwood. And he wrote most of it after the show was over in a book that he did as a companion piece. And I draw a good many quotes from that book because I think, unlike some producer writers, he is very thoughtful about this, and someone who trained with Robert Penn Warren and R.W.B. Lewis and Harold Bloom. I think he knows what he's talking about when he talks about the way the piece was created. Now, I think it's also possible to do, and I think we've demonstrated this, we can take any show on television and find religious thematics. We can do anything that we do with ideology or with gender, we can do with religion. So there's nothing surprising about the fact that we're doing this with popular television programs. But still, I think there's something about the Deadwood that makes it distinctive even in this discussion. Much of it comes from the language, again, on the appropriate side, from Milch's elegant adoption of rhythms and patterns we recognize from other sources. In the essay that I contributed to the collection, it brings me to the way I described it with reference to the strong language that he uses. And I'm quoting the essay now. Admiration for the language of Deadwood, as extensive as the approbation, recognizes that even such socially censured words may be woven into poetry. As presented by this outstanding cast, the language is most often described as Shakespearean. And it is indeed important to note that the language is performed, not merely spoken. As an author in this sense, Milch's function, perhaps more so than with many other creators and executive producer head writers, is somewhat transcendent in the most theological significance of that term. Deadwood may be solidly based in factual history, but it's fully realized, created from Milch's vision. As much as it is Shakespearean, then, the language of Deadwood also draws on the other great text of the period, the 1611 authorized edition of the Bible, the King James Version. That language is biblical throughout Deadwood. Moreover, the language draws on yet another great model that matches as well some of the central characters in Deadwood. This world is populated with beings already fallen from paradise, and in this sense the language is Miltonic as much as it is Shakespearean. Now, clearly, as I've already indicated, the question of authorship in television is a very vexed problem, and there's no need here to wander into issues that bother scholars, studios, the Writers Guild of America, our groups of men and women, young and old, who spend mornings taking the sun at the farmer's market. There is, however, more to the religious underpinnings of Deadwood than the language itself. There is the vision I mentioned earlier. When Milch approached HBO, and he's written a great deal about the genesis of the show, he went to them with this pitch: St. Paul gets collared. As he put it, I originally proposed to HBO to do a series about city cops in Rome in the time of Nero. Nero was crazy, and it interested me to think about what it would be like to be a cop, an instrument of order in a world that could invoke no ordering principle. Besides, do what this insane person tells you to do. Nero would be walking down the street, he'd say that man would be better with his tongue cut out and his hands hung around his neck, and the cops would have to do it. I wanted to imagine what it was like for the cop, and then for the cops to encounter a new organizing principle, which was faith. In the first episode, the head cop was going to be told to arrest St. Paul. And here again is another quote that where he talks about the series. The series was to be, quote, about the lives of city cops in ancient Rome during Nero's reign before a system of justice had been codified. I was interested in how people improvised the structures of a society when there was no law to guide them. How the law developed out of the social impulse to minimize the collateral damage of the taking of revenge. Now, because HBO was doing Rome then, he was asked to think about another place to do it, and he proposed doing it on the frontier, and there's hardly a better place to think about a disordered world than the American frontier in the last quarter of the 19th century. So there's one other quote I want to use here, which also has theological overtones. I settled on a story about Deadwood because the camp came together in the mid-1870s, deep into the Industrial Revolution, and yet it was a reenactment of the story of the founding of America, and a reenactment, too, of the story of original sin. I suppose I accept Hawthorne's definition of original sin as the violation of the sanctity of another's heart. Now, I won't bother myself here thinking there may be a touch of the original in that kind of pride about what you're doing. But I think the key lies in the concerns with how the law developed out of that social impulse to minimize the collateral damage of the taking of revenge, or the concern with the sanctity of the human heart. Because as it turns out, every character in Deadwood is in some degree motivated by revenge and is involved with that. And here the story, everyone is capable of inflicting collateral damage on everyone else. Now this suggests a relationship between the various religious motifs in Deadwood and something like civil religion, as we found in most of the other shows. The sense that an entire culture can be grounded in assumptions either rooted in or displacing overtly theological matters. And certainly in choosing the frontier at this particular moment, Milch has something of that in mind. Deadwood is set in a territory stolen from Native Americans in the year of Custer's defeat, the year that was also the centennial of the Declaration of Independence, and that event was being celebrated at a huge centennial exhibition in Philadelphia at the same time. This was the centennial exhibition where Henry Adams first examined the machines of new electrical power and envisioned a new America. If you remember the education of Henry Adams, he talks about being at the exhibition there. Custer's defeat had simply been a few weeks before, and word got through by telegraph. All those two things going together always amazed me. And here's one of Milch's comments that could stand as a definition of civil religion. My feeling about Deadwood is it's a single organism, and I think human society is the body of God. And in a lot of ways, it's about the different parts of the body having a somewhat more confident sense of their identity over the course of time. And that struggle for identity lies at the heart of Deadwood as well. There are people who are overtly religious in Deadwood. The town's minister is an amazing character. And he at the funeral service for Wild Bill Hickok, who was killed in Deadwood, he goes through a long quote from Paul, and tells us it's one spirit, we all belong to the one body, the familiar passage, and then ends his comment by saying, I believe in God's purpose, not knowing it. I ask him moving in me to allow me to see his will. I ask him moving in others to allow them to see it. Let us now sing how firm a foundation as Mr. Hickok is laid to rest. Now Smith, the minister,